Welcome back to the Urban Elementz studio. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about helping to build your confidence with working with the long arm machine and doing paper pantos on the long arm machine if you're a beginner. Some of it is just going to be things to make you feel a little bit more comfortable, and some of them are going to be some tips or tools that might be helpful for you. One of the things I would like you to do as a favor for yourself is to write down either on a post-it note or make it a project that you can hang on your wall why you personally got into quilting. And if you've been quilting for a while, then maybe you want to write down why you wanted to get into long arm quilting. And the reason why I would ask that you do that for yourself is because it doesn't take very long for you to get a lot of people asking you to do a lot of different things. And sometimes you lose track of why you started doing it to begin with. A lot of people want to gear everything towards business, and that's great. But a lot of people got into quilting for their own personal pleasure, and they start getting a lot of requests. Some of them are for hire, and some of them are for charity. And it's easy to forget why you got into it to begin with. I personally got into quilting because it's part of my family heritage. My grandmother was a quilter of necessity. She used scraps of polyester and cotton. And my mother did not quilt, but she wanted to learn, and she would not go to class by herself. So I told her I would go to classes with her, and that was 30 years ago. My mother still does not quilt, but I do. I love quilting, and I have a firm understanding of why I got into it. I love it, and I do get a lot of requests from a lot of different angles to do a lot of different things, but I remember what my focus is and what my drive is, and I want you to remember what yours is, and remember to say no when that's appropriate. Another thing that I would like you to do is remember that when we're watching people on TV, or we see people at shows or at a local shop, and they are so amazing, remember they weren't so amazing when they started. We see them quilting beautiful things. They didn't quilt beautiful things when they started. So you cannot compare your work to their work now. Most quilters don't show you their work at the beginning, but I think it's important that we keep those things and even label them. You might even want to label them and keep a notebook of those things so you can see your progress. Even famous artists back in like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, they kept drafting books. They did drawings over and over, sketches, and they weren't all good. And they were like incredible artists. So you have to cut yourself some slack to begin with. You have to let yourself learn to walk and then learn to run. One of the things that you also want to do is make sure that you're working with good stuff. If your machine does not have good tension, you're going to be running into some problems that aren't necessarily yours. They're not user error. And so one of the things that I find really useful is toe tension gauge. This is not something that we sell. They do have a digital model and a manual model, analog I guess. And what you would do is you fill your bobbin up and you put the whole bobbin case in here and run it through the loops, and you pull the thread. And this will tell you what the tension is on the bobbin case. If you do it every time you load a bobbin, it will tell you every time what your tension is in the bobbin. Your bobbin case should always read approximately the same. On my machine, I shoot for around 210 to 220. If my bobbin case is always the same, then I only have to worry about the top, and that's much easier to adjust. So if I can eliminate that from my problem list, which is a pretty big thing that can be confounding, that is a big plus. Another thing that could be an issue is thread. So it's always nice to talk to other quilters to find out what thread they find useful. And it's also good to mention the type of machine you use, because it's my personal opinion that certain machines seem to like certain kinds of thread better than others. I used to use a lot of cotton when I had a handy quilter, and I don't have a handy quilter now. I have a Bernina, and on the Bernina I got a ton of lint in the bobbin mechanism when I used cotton, and I found it a little bit harder to get the tension correct. Now the bobbin mechanism is completely closed, so I wasn't worried about lint getting into the machine, but I just found that rayon or other types of thread worked a little bit better for me. So I usually use isocord, but that's irrelevant. Just find the kind of thread that works for you. I know it's fun to practice on something that's inexpensive, but if you pull out thread from your grandmother's sewing box that's 50 years old and it may be dry rotted, you may be asking for trouble that you don't need. You may have dry rotted thread, and it may be free, but it may be hindering your progress. So try and get at least, it doesn't have to be expensive thread, but try and get at least new thread. And if you can, find out who uses what kind of thread for the kind of machine that you have. And if you're going to follow advice from somebody, try and follow their advice all the way through. You can't follow somebody's advice for bobbin tension and somebody else's advice for top tension, because they're both going to be doing different things. So you kind of have to follow a guru, their advice all the way through. You can't pick and choose little bits of somebody's advice, because it's not necessarily going to mesh together. Another thing that I like to use with the paper panto is a pantograph grid. Basically, this is a long mylar plastic sheeting that goes on the back of the machine, and your paper panto goes underneath this. This gets more or less permanently affixed to the back. I have mine with poster clamps at the top end of it, which open and close. So that is if I do need to remove the pantograph grid for any reason. But I center my pantograph grid in the center of the table, and I do that because I want the panto in the center of the table. Because if it's all the way at the back end, as you roll up the quilt, the roll-up bar gets fatter, especially on a king-size quilt. And if you're using double batting, it's certainly going to get thicker, and you may not be able to reach the bottom portions of the panto anymore. And that can create a problem for how to realign the quilt. So if we put the panto in the middle of our back table, then you will always be able to reach all the parts of the panto. And we do have a whole video on finding your center, which is how we find the center of our sewing space and the center of the back of our table. So the pantograph grid is a one-time purchase. There are 3 different sizes of this depending on the size of your machine, and this is an invaluable purchase. It is an expensive product compared to the paper panto, but you only buy it once, and also you can put it on your wish list. This does go on sale twice a year, and so if that is the issue, you could go ahead and do that. Also, your wish list can be sent to members of your family, and they could buy items off of your wish list for celebration, like for your birthday or for holidays or something. Another thing that I would mention is you don't have to wait until you get to the machine to start playing with a paper panto. This particular panto is called Malachite, It was designed by Patricia Ritter. This one is a single row, which means that you're only going to do a pass once across. Some of our pantos are double rows, which means you'll sew it all the way from one side to the other, then go back to the beginning and sew it from one side to the other again. And this one is just one row. It does basically up and down all the way across. Malachite is one of our top sellers. It works on a lot of different quilts. It gives beautiful texture. It may not look amazing as it is here on paper, but it stitches out beautifully. Works great for both men and women. And if you look on Facebook, you'll see many people recommend this particular panto. And what you could do when you get a new panto is just take your finger and visually follow the panto line. And you could do this several times just so you can see how the flow of the design works and how it switches from one side to the other. And you will get the rhythm of when it switches over, and you won't be surprised when you get to the machine. You'll know that it's going to do that. Some of the designs will go several over and then backs. They have different flows to them, and by following it with your finger, it gets you very comfortable with it before you start stitching. So that's something that I really recommend when you're starting out, and it can really make you a little bit more confident before you even get back to the machine. I was stitching out, I was doing a video on how to advance the quilt and make sure you have the proper spacing in between the rows, and I did both single row and double row. And that was a video I just did this week. And I had a friend here, and he was working on dirt bikes. That's what he does. And he's never done anything with quilting. He's never even seen me do quilting. But I just wanted to see him do it. I was just curious to see how it would go. Someone who has absolutely no context of machine quilting at all, no context of quilting. And so I had him come in and I recorded it. So he long-armed the next row that I did, and then he came out front and we looked at it. And for having never done anything with quilting, he had, obviously it's not perfect, but he'd made a couple of the same mistakes that I had made in the row before. And you know, he was beating himself up the way we all do, but all in all, it really isn't that bad for one pass very first time. So I'm going to show you that. But the thing is that we always beat ourselves up, and of course it's not going to be great the first time off or the second time. I don't do manual panto anymore because I have a digital quilting machine. I do paper pantos for teaching because we need to illustrate that, but I'm not real great at it anymore because I don't do enough of it. I'm going to try and pull out one of the quilts that I did when I used to do paper pantos and show you that I was proficient at it at one time. But I do more digital quilting now because I invested all that money in a digital system. But you have to give yourself room to grow. But on the sample, I have solid fabric and I have dark thread. That was because I wanted the video to pick up very clearly what I was doing, and I didn't mind the video picking up the mistakes. And I recommend to you also, when you start, just put in cheap regular fabric. Do not load a quilt that you've been wanting to get quilted when you're just starting, because you're not going to do the greatest job on your first quilt. You may have some thread knots in the back, you may have some tension issues, you may get backwards in the way that you're quilting. If your bobbin runs out, you may start going the wrong way with the quilting. There's all kinds of things that could happen, and you don't want those to happen on a quilt that you worked 6 or 9 months on. So just load an old tablecloth or some sale fabric from the local quilt store, or just some solid fabric so you could actually see. And remember, since it's a test piece, you don't have to just quilt over one area once. You could quilt over it 2 or 3 times and change the thread color and just look at the thread color changes to see how you're doing. That way you can build confidence without wasting a lot of batting and a lot of different fabric. So that would help, you get some practice under your belt, and you're not wasting a lot of fabric. You also can cut those samples up. I know some shelters will use those as dog or cat blankets, and so they will take them as donations. And some people have their own pets and they can use them in that way also. Another thing that I will talk about, I was talking about using dark thread on my sample for the last video. I'm going to be changing out the thread for this video, but the same fabric is still on the frame. But I also added 2 additional strips of fabric, and I'm going to load a thread that is both a closer color match to the fabrics and also a closer value match. The value is the amount of light or dark, and that is the most important. A lot of quilters will say that color gets all the credit, but value does all the work. If you had a log cabin quilt and it was all different colors, but the value was not there, then it doesn't read like a log cabin. If you had the value there and all different colors, then it looks like a log cabin quilt, even at a distance. That is the important thing, is the value in most blocks. If you don't have a value in the blocks, you usually can't tell what the block is unless you're right up on it. A good value quilt, you could see the block from across the room even before you could see the colors. So value is the king. I personally like to choose thread that is a very close match to the value of the quilt, at least the majority of the quilt, because I don't want my quilting to be screaming across the room. I want it to be something that you see when you're more in proximity to the quilt, when you're up close and personal. I don't want the quilting to overpower the fabric or the quilt pattern. So I like it to be a little bit more subtle. You can make that decision yourself later when you get more proficient, but in the beginning, a lower contrast is going to hide more of your mistakes than a very high contrast. So let's take a look at the work that Steve did yesterday, and that one that I did the row before, and then I'm going to go ahead and change the thread color, and I'll get back there and start doing another row of quilting. This is the last row that I did, and this paper panto is called Plumbago. It is by Patricia Ritter, and it's measured. This was a double row panto, so the measurement is for both rows. It was 7.5 inches high. So I did the first row of the panto, and then Steve, who's never quilted in any way, came in and did this one. And you can see he was really jerky at first, but then it started to smooth out. And by the end, it was a lot more fluid and just one pass. The mistakes that we did notice were the crossovers. Those are always probably the most obvious when doing a panto, but he had crossovers, but I had a couple of crossovers as well. And that's because I'm out of practice. Another thing he talked about was how some of the pieces were blunt and not as curved. But as I was telling him, because this is an organic flower shape, once we're away from the pattern, nobody knows what the pattern was supposed to be. And because it's organic, they assume that that's what we were intending. nobody knows if it was supposed to be curved, or because there are plants that have more of a blunt end to them. So once you get down to this end, it really is much better. If you take into account that we would match the thread color in value here, this really would be completely acceptable on a quilt. Maybe not for a customer, but certainly for your own. So I'm going to do the next row after I change the thread color, and we're going to see what the difference is when we get onto a printed fabric, and even down here onto this, even though this is the lower value, we'll see how it changes. Also, I want to say, before I get to quilting myself, I'm going to stick in the clip of him quilting this row and what we said afterwards, and then I'll do my row. See this red light?
Yeah.
You're going to follow that red light on this line.
Yeah. How do I do that?
By holding your hands here.
Yeah.
Like this.
Oh. Yeah, God, crazy.
No.
Follow that line?
Yeah. And see this
Does
here?
it move by itself though?
What?
Does it move by itself?
No, you're moving.
Oh my gosh, crazy.
This is the button that's going to start it and stop it. You only push it once to start it, and then you move.
Okay.
And when you get to the end, you're going to push it again to stop it. And you go slow.
What do we do now? Push the button.
The one over there, just one, on the right, the left side of it. As I get to this part here, try and pay attention to how the pattern quilting looks when we go from solid to printed fabric, and try and look at how the different value from this to the new thread color is on the quilt. Okay, I'm going to get ready to do the next row, and we're going to see how it goes from the floral to the lighter value in fabric. And I'm going to make a confession. I was basting the edge of my fabric down, and I didn't take the machine off basting, so these stitches are a little bit bigger than what they should have been. But the effect is still the same. You can still see the thread color and the value of it. I have changed that now, so you'll see the stitching. It's funny though, because some of this is very small. It's much smaller than basting. Okay, just by making one change, and that was by changing the thread, you can see what a dramatic difference the quilting visually looks. Now, I didn't get any better at my manual quilting from the weekend. Just changing the value of that thread and matching the color a little bit closer made all the difference in the world. Here, where I was using a very dark thread so that people could see what I was doing, it's very high contrast. It's not terrible, but it does show up a lot more. When I change to the thread, here it looks perfectly fine. When we go into the floral, the quilting almost completely disappears. It just completely stabilizes the quilt, which is what quilting is meant to do. And then when we go into this tone-on-tone fabric, even though it was a much lighter value than this and this, the thread color still works beautifully. You can see the quilting here. It gives it a ton of texture, but yet it isn't screaming and it isn't amplifying any of my mistakes. Now, certainly there are as many mistakes here that there were up here. As I said, I did not improve my manual quilting just in the last 2 days. So keep in mind what a big difference your thread choices can make in your quilting. I've said in previous videos that the Panto is not a drill sergeant. It really is a roadmap or a spirit guide to help guide you through the desert. We don't need to follow it step by step and worry about getting a step out of line. In fact, we don't even want to be staring at the laser dot at all. Keep in mind, if you've ever carried a tray with something on it, we don't stare at the tray and we don't stare at our feet, because the minute we start to do that, we trip or we drop the tray. We have to look ahead and we have to look where we're going, and that's how we walk smoothly and without dropping the tray. The same is true when we're doing a panto. The laser light may be on the line, but we want to look slightly ahead of where the laser light is at, and we want to see where the laser light is heading. That way we can mentally become accustomed to where that laser light is heading and get ready to make the adjustments we need to. Another thing that I would like to say is kind of the difference between why we would use a paper panto over free motion quilting. And first I want to tell you a little story. I used to work in a quilting store many years ago, and one of my favorite things to do was choosing fabric for customers. I almost felt like if I held up fabric, I could hear fabric singing or zinging from across the room. And it was just like my eye could match things, and I would walk over and get it. And sometimes once you pulled that bolt out, the match may get stronger or it may dissipate, because more of the colors in that bolt would become present, and it may disappear or it may get stronger. But I used to love picking out fabric. And the quilt shop about 6 or 9 months apart, we would take all the bolts off and we would rearrange all of the fabric. And as much as I loved to do that, those were mentally exhausting days. Going through and sorting out color, either by color or by value, over and over and over again, making your mind decide, is this lighter or darker? Is this violet or purple? Is this aqua or teal? It's exhausting. And if you do that for 5 or 6 or 7 hours, it may not be physically exhausting, but when you go home, you can't do anything. It's the same kind of if you have to alphabetize for 6 or 7 hours and your mind has to keep saying A, B, C, D, F, G, H, P, Q, R. I mean, that's what I have to do because I'm not real good with the alphabet. I can't just know intuitively what letter that pops something in. And that's the same for me with free motion quilting. You have to constantly be trying to figure out where you're going next, what the next part of the design is. And it can be very tiring. And so I find doing paper pantos such a relief. You are following the line, and when you're done, you have a beautiful design. And while some people say it could be monotonous, with over 10,000 designs to choose from that are absolutely incredible, that cover almost every theme that you can think of, I don't know how you could say that's monotonous. But I do hear people say quite often, I don't need them. I can come up with my own designs. And often these are people that are doing stippling. They start with stippling or dog bones or swirls. And some of them 10 years later are still doing stippling, dog bones, and swirls. They never progress. And I've never understood if it's pride or hubris, why they won't try a paper panto. I just don't understand. I find them to be such a joy to do. And they are so much faster because, as I said, you're not spending the time trying to figure out what to do next. You're not getting yourself backed into a corner or having to work yourself out of something. It's just you're following the line and it goes so fast. Some of the paper pantos I've done in the past, like Angel Wing, they're very open and you spend more time rolling up the quilt than you do in the quilting process. I just never found that to be true with free motion quilting. And it's certainly not true of custom quilting, which could take weeks. So I really love doing paper pantos. Well, or I used to love doing it because I have the digital system now. The next thing I'm going to do, I have a box in my corner. I have to dig it out. I was going to do that anyway because I'm going to put them in quilting storage bags. But I want to see if I can find a quilt that has some of my panto quilting on it from when I was a little bit better at it. But I'm not going to promise yet because I can't guarantee there's one in there. But if I don't, I'll just close out. But if I do, I'll bring it back in and show you. Well, I found one. This is an old quilt made with Robin Pandolph fabric. I believe it was a class I taught back in the day. The quilt is done with a panto, but I will say this was when I had the handy quilter and the machine was giving me problems on the tension. So it may not be the greatest example of my quilting, but it is a quilt that was made with a panto that I did free motion. So there's that. If you've ever seen anybody that started working on a marathon or working out at the gym, setting up a new weight loss goal, or anything similar to that, what you might have seen them do is take rigorous notes on their height, their weight, their measurements, and also taking pictures, because what they want to do is keep progress of where they were and where they're headed. They might also even set goals for themselves. And it's funny because it seems like a lot of quilters want to hide where they started. And I'm not really sure why that is. I really think it's important for us to see how far we've come, because if we hide the beginning, we can't see how wonderful we are doing now. So I recommend also that you keep yourself a little journal. You don't have to share it with anybody, but just keep yourself some photographs, some notes on the different quilts you've done, who maybe ended up with the quilt, how long it took you to do it, what machine you did, what pattern it was, what thread you used. Believe it or not, those things, you may not remember all of them later, and you may really want to know later on, and maybe your family will want to know also. Another important thing is also to remember to put a label on your quilts, because sometimes we have quilts in our house that people will attribute to us because we're the quilter, but maybe another one of the quilters that we love or that love us would have gifted it to us, you know, someone from our guild or something like that. So labels are really great, and so that's a wonderful idea. Urban Elements has sales many times during the year. Usually any item or any category that's on sale, they usually also include the catalogs. I always love to have a paper panto catalog in the house on my hands. It's really great to keep on hand, so you don't have to be online or on your phone. Late at night, it's not good to be in front of a screen because it prevents you from getting any rest. But you could go through the catalog, highlight different items that you like. You could also keep a catalog with just for items that you already have or you purchased, and you could categorize those in any color theme that you wanted. One color could be for boys, one color could be for girls, one color could be for Halloween or Christmas themed pantos, and it's just a great thing that you could show different friends or clients, if you have those, what patterns that you have on hand, and help you create a little portfolio for yourself. So I really find this very valuable, and like I said, they're usually on sale with any category that's on sale, but you can check that when that happens. And if you sign up for our newsletter, you would always be notified when we have sales. And paper pantos is one of the categories that we have on sale. So I hope you found at least some of the information today inspiring or useful, and we will continue to have videos like this, of course. So we hope that you will subscribe to the videos and hopefully like our videos, maybe even share them. And we look forward to seeing you again here in the Urban Elements studio next time. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other.